Welcome back. I always hate to start back up when I know there's so many great conversations taking place, but we have an exciting rest of the afternoon. So thank you for making your way back in. You know, as Dwayne said, I hope everyone had a chance to connect with someone new or a lifelong friend, of which there's so many folks that come year after year do feel like family. So we've spent the morning, or at least the first half of the afternoon, talking about what we can do at the individual, community, and systems level to help remove barriers that far too many North Carolinians face when trying to connect and engage in the workplace. But there is another dimension of the conversation that is far too often overlooked. And that is that a lot of people left the workforce because the jobs just weren't good. But what is a good job? And how do we make the transition as a society to create more of them? Our next guest, an author and director of the Better Life Lab at New America, has spent a lot of time researching those questions and more. I, for one, am very interested in what she has to say. So everyone, please help me welcome Brigid Schulte to the stage.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, hi. So this is tough. I'm the post-networking event person. And so we'll see. Hopefully people will filter in. But I understand that you might have been seated a question, at lunchtime that you've had a chance to kind of noodle. And I'm going to save a little bit of time toward the end that I really want us to, kind of come together as a group and talk about. And that's really kind of two questions that sort of shaped this project that I've been working on that I'm going to share with you today. And that is, what is your vision of an equitable future of work and well-being? And then once you think about that, what does that look like? Kind of bust out your imagination. How do we get there? So think about that. Those are some questions that I'm going to share a little bit about what we did, and then I want to create some time that we can share some of your thoughts. And then I know the next panel is going to be diving even more into practical solutions. So let me start a little bit with who I am and what we did, and why we're talking about work stress and the future of work, care, and well-being. Really asking that question, how do we design a better, equitable future? So I'm a longtime journalist and author. I wrote a book called Overwhelmed, Work, Love, and Play When No One Has the Time, all about time pressure. And that really led me to this journey that I've been on, really looking at how do we create work structures, how do we create public policy, how do we shift our culture so that all people are really able to combine decent, good work with time for care, connection, love, and well-being. And have some space for fun and for leisure. So I run something called the Better Life Lab, because at heart, what all of this is about, we talk about work-family justice is what we call our work, or gender equality. It's really about quality of life, having a better life for all of us. So what I want to start with are sort of two visions for this future. Here we go, the Harvard psychologist Erik Erikson. He said that the richest and fullest lives make time for the three great arenas of life: work, love, and play. When we think about it now, where are we now in our current, our current reality? Well, in the United States, I'm going to talk a little bit more about this. We work among the longest hours of any advanced economy. And some of that is because we don't have any guarantee for paid time off to rest and recharge. And what that tends to look like is if you are in the professional and managerial, sort of the elite class, you overwork in one job, working late, checking your emails, kind of showing up to be this ideal worker. And if you happen to be in the, we have this growing bifurcated workforce, if you are in the more low-wage service retail sector, you tend to overwork in several jobs, or a job in a side hustle, or a job in trying to find benefits. Because I think what people don't recognize is that in the last 40 or 50 years, for a whole host of reasons, we've hollowed out the middle, and we've got this sort of these two barbells, if you will, of jobs that we're creating, really good jobs and really crummy jobs. Do you know that 70% of the people who are Medicaid and recipients of food aid actually work full-time? They work full-time in jobs that are so crummy that they can't even put food on the table. So these are some of the challenges where we think of where we are now, and then project that out into the future. Where does that mean? Where are we going? How do we get to this more equitable vision where, just imagine you have good, decent work. We have shared prosperity. We have health and well-being. You have time for care and connection and love. Because what we've found from all of this wonderful happiness research, like out of Harvard and other places, is that the fundamental, the basis of human happiness comes from our connection with other people, the sphere of love, our time that we have together, our relationships. So how do we create this future where there is time for that, time for care, caring for ourselves, caring for others, people that we love? How do we get there from here? Because the other scenario is if we continue making the same choices that we've been making, if you look at what the market's been creating when it comes to jobs, when you look at the public policy response, when you look at our cultural response, I call it Blade Runner. We already have really grotesque inequality in this country. And if we continue on the path that we've been on, again, if you look at MIT and the Future of Work Commission there, or the work of David Otter, the Economist, he talks about the future looking like two barbells. If we leave the market to its market forces, we are creating really good jobs and really crummy jobs. And he says if we don't figure out how to deal with that, how to make different choices, we run the risk of creating a future of the servers and the served. Is that the kind of future that you want to live in? These are the kinds of questions to be thinking about. So let's start with this project that we were working on. So what we did is we put together a 10-episode podcast series, because living in Washington, D.C., a lot of times people think the policy solution is to get a lot of smart, academics and researchers in a room and think about it, and come up with some great policy. But we want to flip that on its head, because to us, there is another expertise out there that we also need to be paying attention to and have a seat at the table, and that is the lived experience. The actual human beings, workers, what is it that families need? What do workers need? What do they say? What is their vision? So we wanted a podcast filled with voices. So we had warehouse workers and home care workers. We had lawyers. We had tech workers of color. We had a number of people from all walks of life, nurses, telling their stories. And then we brought in subject matter experts to help put that in context, help us understand these larger trends. And from there, then we held a big convening, and we brought together all these disparate voices, workers, advocates, business leaders, policymakers, researchers, and academics. And we came together and we posed these questions. What is our vision of this future of work, and how do we get there? And we started with what we know, which is that current work isn't working for anyone right now. And we really used work stress, some of the research around that, to make that case. For instance, Jeff Pfeffer is a Stanford business professor, and he and his colleagues, they did a meta-analysis of more than 200 studies looking at work stress and how that impacted health, and then for business, what that meant for your bottom line, the cost that you end up paying, and then we as a society end up paying. And what they found is that if you looked at work stress, and they call it psychosocial work stress because it's both psychological and social. It's not like you're falling off of a ladder or breathing asbestos. This is work-family conflict. This is having a high job demands and feeling like you don't have a whole lot of control about it. You don't have much say. It's called the effort-reward imbalance. So if you're putting out more effort than the reward you're getting back, that's a high job strain. If you don't have what's called decision latitude, if you can't make a decision or you don't have control over your schedule, you have no say over your workload, that's another huge stressor. And think about that. How many retail workers out there have just-in-time scheduling or clopenings or, their boss is an algorithm and they have no idea when they're going to work? There's research that shows that disorganized time and that volatile income is actually much more stressful for human beings. It's not the way we were designed to live. So what they found is that, looking at these 200 studies, that work stress itself today makes work the 5th leading cause of death in the United States. About on par is like secondhand smoke, and that's a known and regulated carcinogen. It's interesting that a lot of this research doesn't seem to settle in, that I would think that people would be out in the streets screaming about it. But it seems hard because we tend to think that work stress is an individual problem, you just couldn't cope, and so then it requires an individual solution. Just go take a bath. Here's a meditation app. Why don't you do lunchtime yoga? And instead, really what these are showing us that the systems are what are creating the stress. It's that low-wage work that creates stress. It's that unpredictable schedule that creates stress. It's that work-family conflict when you don't have flexible work, you don't have support for your caregiving, and then you have to try to figure it all out on your own, how you're going to make it all work. Because our work systems are still very much based on, the 1950s, the ideal worker. When you look at research, 70%, there was one study that found 70% or more of all top CEOs and top business leaders, when you asked them, who is the ideal worker? They said someone with no caregiving responsibilities. Well, who is that anymore? It's really nobody. That might have been true in the 1950s for a certain segment of the population, but we never really were a nation of breadwinner homemaker. That was sort of Ozzie and Harriet. Talk about the power of Hollywood, man. The Harvard Business School recently published a report where they surveyed. Part of the problem is that people don't think of themselves as caregivers, so they had to ask the question differently. Do you take care of anyone? Do you have someone that you love, that you do things for? And when they asked the question in a different way, nearly 3/4 of all employees of all genders said that they had care responsibilities. So the workplace is not set up for any of us anymore. So that's one kind of work stress, one aspect. And the other is inequality. When you think about what's been happening, say, for the last 40-some years, this is a graph that the Economic Policy Institute has put together, and I just find it so incredibly powerful. If you look, after the Second World War, for a period of time, as productivity rose, workers' wages rose in concert. And then if you look right about in the late 70s, early 80s, that started to change. And then as productivity rose, wages started to stagnate. And so much more of the fruits of the labor or the productivity that comes from automation and technology, which we're going to have increasingly, the benefits of that went more and more to the owners, to the business class. And so sometimes that just drives me mad when I see, oh no, wages are rising and there's inflation, because it lacks the context of this much larger and longer historical trend that wages for human beings in this country, for so many working class, blue-collar workers, for those that are left, really have been stagnating. There was a time when CEOs made about certainly more than their workers, but it was, again, a fairly stable figure. And then again, because of policy decisions that we made, certain things became tax deductible, and all of a sudden it was advantageous to have huge CEO packages and stock options and this and that. And now you've got cases where on average CEOs make about 350 times what their workers make, which used to be about 30, and in some cases 1,000% more. So again, growing inequality. And what's interesting is that throughout human history, fairness has been a huge driver at work. There's a gigantic history of work by Jan Lucassen, who's a Dutch historian. And he said throughout human history, work has been driven by three things. Cooperation, because we human beings, we exist, we are where we are because we know how to cooperate. Meaning and fairness. I think, did I just go too fast? I don't know how to go back. Oh, is this back? Yeah. Oh, forward. Sorry. So that sense of when things feel unfair, there's something that's called moral injury. And that really, it can dampen morale, it can affect workplace cultures, but also affect us all much more broadly as well. So going back to one of the points that I made originally, the whole idea that we're on this path toward increasing inequality unless we act, unless we figure out how to intervene, what are our roles to change this, so that you can see that the market is either creating high-paying jobs or low-paying jobs, and automation is really hollowing out the middle. Those kind of stable middle-class jobs. And why we should care about that is the middle class is really the job creator in this country. I mean, think about it. 70% of our economy is driven by consumer spending. If you have a worker with a good job, they stay connected to the labor force, they go out and they buy things, they invest in small businesses, they are able to hire more people, and on and on and on. We've had this notion that the top 1% are the job creators, but there's only so many pairs of tennis shoes one person with a private island can buy. In the United States, we've also made other choices. Our part-time work, which would benefit caregivers, actually isn't very good work. In other countries, part-time work, the wages are on par with full-time work. There are benefits, there's pathways to advancement. Here, we pay our low-skill workers much lower. I hate to use it low skill because all work has skill to it, but our low-wage work. Why do we have low-wage work if we're one of the wealthiest countries in the world? I think that when we think about thinking big about the future of work, we need to begin to interrogate some of these assumptions that we've made. Why do we allow crummy jobs here? Why have we made those choices? And why do we have this really a broken social contract between employers, government, and workers, private, public sector, and workers? Workers really are on their own. We've got growing precarity, not just at the low wage end, but also, just think of all these recent tech and finance layoffs. Those are incredibly stressful. There's a lot of precarity at the high end as well, which kind of puts you in this vigilance mode because you're always waiting for the other shoe to drop. We have no paid parental leave. We are really the only advanced economy with no paid maternal leave. So we've got a certain percentage of women who go back to work within a week or two of giving birth, which, having given birth twice, is really inhuman. We are one of 6 that has no paid parental leave for men. We have no paid sick days. We had an emergency paid sick days law during the pandemic. It actually didn't cover a whole lot of people because at the last minute, workers who worked in companies with more than 500 employees were exempted, and that's where most of the workers in the United States with low-wage jobs, that's where they work, the Walmarts and the Targets and so on, and the Amazons of the world. Some private employers, did step in and choose to offer paid sick days to their workers, but not all. And I think why this is important is that the research shows that when you have paid sick days, and it's a guarantee, like just about every other country, I think there are about 6 or 7 that don't, including the United States. Actually, people stay home then. They don't have to choose between a paycheck or their health. And so in the states or cities where there have been paid sick days, the spread of COVID was much slower and the death rate was lower. So there's actual real benefits. A lot of these policies end up paying for themselves. And like I mentioned, we have no paid annual leave. We also have very little investment in things that others consider public goods, like childcare. and what's wild about this is childcare is one of the things that actually ends up paying for itself. If you invest in childcare, like a universal, equitable childcare system, what ends up happening in the short term is that women who tend to be the primary caregivers are able to stay connected to the workforce, so they're able to stay in their jobs, which increases family stability. Again, they go out and they buy things that they're able to contribute to the economy. Small businesses then can hire other people and grow. So in the short term, it pays for itself that way, but in the long term, having children exposed to high quality, stable early education, if you look at research done by Nobel Economist, the Heckman research, the benefits in the long run are enormous, sometimes 13 to 1 return on investment, because what you have is greater education then with the young children. This is based on years of longitudinal research. They end up getting better jobs. They need fewer public benefits. The benefits and the investments just cascade. It's all leads to really good things. We don't have an unemployment system that works very well. Other countries, there's longer periods of time, greater wage replacement, and then education and training are often a part of an unemployment package, because the idea is we want to help bounce you up to the next job. What ends up happening here, as you can see, on average, about 30% of people who apply for unemployment benefits in this country actually receive them, and that didn't change much during the pandemic. And it depends very much on the state where you are about what kind of benefits you'll get, whether anybody will answer the phone, and we don't have the same education and training. So sometimes here in this country, unemployment is actually one of the 10 psychosocial stressors, because the research shows unemployment can lead to not only depression, but ill health and even suicide. It can spiral a family into poverty pretty quickly. And then we've got this brave new corona normal world where, the pandemic will officially be over, apparently May 11th, and yet people are still getting sick. Thankfully, rates are falling, but we're sort of now in this era where we've come through sort of this unbelievable crisis, experiment, whatever you want to call it. And the historian Patrick Wyman has said, crises like this reveal what is already broken or in the process of breaking. So we can take what we've learned, what we've seen through this whole experience, and make different choices. Choose what kind of future we want based on what we've just experienced. In the pandemic, if you look, women really suffered so much. They took the brunt of the, schools closing, childcare closing down. But it wasn't, you have to look a little bit deeper at the numbers. And if you look at who bore the brunt of that lack of childcare, it was mothers with a high school education or less and Black mothers. College-educated women, again, going back to that barbell and the bifurcated workforce, they were able to recover fairly quickly. But many others are still suffering. And when you think about essential workers, we went out and we clapped and we banged pots and pans for them. Then we didn't do a whole lot else. And they actually suffered much higher infection and death rates than not essential workers. So let's think about the future of work and well-being. I've got a few minutes left. The real question, again, when we think about the future of work, we know that automation is going to create new jobs. It will destroy some, it will create others. We don't have buggy whips anymore, but we do have things like content moderators and life coaches and TikTok influencers, things that we couldn't imagine, 30, 40 years ago. So as jobs are destroyed and jobs are created, the real question is, will they be big enough to sustain human life? Will we make those choices? Or will we get more of the high and the low and end up with an unequal society of the servers and the served? And so what we found in our convening and having lots of different conversations in our podcast is that the future is really a choice, and that we all have a role to play in creating the future that we want. So really briefly, and I'm happy to share these slides later, a couple of the things that came out of our convening. What can businesses do? Well, you can commit to creating good jobs for the long term. And I know that sounds impossible because we're so stuck in this short-termer mentality. But we had Warren Valdmanis on the podcast and also the convening. He's an investor, a private equity investor in Two Sigma Impact. And he is only investing in companies that commit to creating good jobs, where there's a sense of meaning and purpose, where there's fairness, which means good pay, schedule control, a say. This is all based on research, and it's profitable. It actually leads to more business profitability and sustainable work. And what he said the key for most businesses here is belief, because the data is there. So it's all about how do you shift your mindset. Policymakers, there's an awful lot policymakers can do. Invest in care infrastructure, because that does pay for itself, and that will lead to more equity, particularly for women and caregivers. Think about workers as assets. We have a tax policy that actually makes it it's a market distortion. You can invest in capital and in software and machinery and get like a 25 to 33% tax deduction. If you invest in your workforce, it's 0 to 5%. That's something, that's a market distortion right there that sort of like leads you toward automation and away from humans. So my goal is to let's not just talk about robots and sexy AI when we think about the future of work. Let's really center humans on it. Storytellers like me, we can do an awful lot, a much better job when we report on the stock market. Let's remember the stock market is not the economy. 84% of all stocks are owned by the top 10% of the wealthiest families. Wall Street is not Main Street. We can remember that. There's lots of other recommendations in our report. And workers and advocates, know that you're not alone. Share your story. Come together. Share your stories. Work together. And, work with advocates. Work with business. So these are just a few of the ideas that those living the experience shared with us. Because I think what we do all want is to get to that place where we can say we've had a good life. So I don't know, do I have any time for anybody to share their thoughts? It says 5 minutes here, but yeah. So does anybody have, I'd love to hear from you at this point. Anybody want to share sort of your vision for an equitable future of work and well-being? And if you have one idea for how we might get there.
I was reluctant to say anything because I keep talking. But I see an equitable community that focuses on workforce development, affordable housing, and business development all together. Because I feel in order for us to have a strong economy, we need to definitely focus on equipping our people. It starts with the people. Then we need to build businesses, because build new businesses from within the communities, then those businesses, instead of going out and getting big businesses to come in, build small businesses within that can be expanded to grow bigger. And all of it has to have a live, work, play community. That's my plan.
I love that. All right. Well, thank you all so much. Thank you all so much for your time. Do we have time for one more, or is it time to rock and roll? The one thing that I would leave you with is, I know we've talked a lot about, or through the day, about education and training, and that's all really, really important. But remember, there are 53 million low-wage jobs. That's 44% of the workforce. So we can't train everyone into jobs. Where are those better jobs? Right now, they don't exist. What we need to do is commit to making those better jobs. Thank you so much for your time.
Please welcome to the stage Cecilia Holden, Gerald Cohen, and Sara Chester.
Hello, everybody. It's a big room out there, so I have to tell you, I've been back in the speaker room, and everybody comes back there, I'm nervous. And I said, it's a friendly audience, right? Y'all want us to be successful, so how about it? I have the privilege today of hosting this panel, facilitating a conversation, and have with me two very esteemed colleagues, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. I've learned a lot myself, just studying up on what they bring to the table. I'll start with an introduction of myself. I'm Cecilia Holden. I'm CEO and president of a 501c3 nonprofit. It's called myFutureNC, and we're focused on the state's educational attainment goal. I also want to point out that Randolph Keaton, who was on the panel earlier, he was from Columbus County, and so I know that Jack Cecil thinks Western North Carolina is all there is, but I'm from Eastern North Carolina as well, so I'm a Columbus County native too, so I just throw that out for Jack with Randolph's comments earlier. Joining me today, we have Gerald Cohen, Chief Economist with the Kenan Institute of Private Enterprise at UNC Chapel Hill. And then we also have Sara Chester, Co-Executive Director of the Industrial Commons in Burke County. So Gerald and Sara, we often come to great convenings like this and we walk away with a lot of good information. It's hard to turn into action. And so when we leave, what I really want to do is to make sure that we leave this audience with some opportunities that they can take and go back and implement. So when we think about what Brigid just shared, I'd love to start with a comment and a question to you. I want to keep this conversation going and center it around concrete examples of what we can do. We know that we can't continue to do workforce development like we've always done it. I think everybody knows that. Times are changing. We've got changing demographics, economics, technology, social situations. Employers are having to rethink fundamentally how they offer a work environment for our employees. This includes everything from transforming the recruitment process, how we attract employers, and then also how we manage employees or attract employees, and then how we manage them when they actually are onboarded in our organizations. It also requires transformation at every level, from employers to employees as well as the community. So I'm curious to hear your ideas today. What is one thing that this audience could do that would get us moving toward a future of work that feels balanced, promotes well-being for both employees and employers? And if I could phrase it a little differently, how can we create a work environment where people want to be? A work environment that allows businesses to remain profitable so they can keep jobs so that people have a place to work.
I guess I'm starting. So Cecilia, thank you. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me. So I'm a rule follower. So I actually sat down at a table at lunch with 3 people I had never met before, and I made some new friends, including my new friend Muffy Grant. So a shout out to Muffy, who's the head of North Carolina Early Childhood Foundation. And we got into a very significant discussion about the benefits of early childhood education. And that was going to be my, or is my recommendation. But then Governor Cooper stole my thunder. So what I'm going to recommend is holding his feet to the fire. So as a macroeconomist, I think of the U.S. economy, $25 trillion. And when I work in the policy world, I think about the impact of, what policies can move the needle and, have trillion-dollar impacts or impacts that are, approximate that. And one of the lessons learned is early childhood education can really, really move the needle. So my recommendation is hold the administration to that, or hold Governor Cooper to that promise, because I think it's a really transformative change.
Thanks, Gerald. Sara, how about you?
Sure.
Are you challenging the governor as well today?
No, I'll pass on that one. I'll tell a little bit more about what we do later, but we help start businesses in Burke County and create good quality jobs. And I think one thing that we've hit on in terms of our success is to really just ask people what they want. And I think often there's a key about listening that you have to first start by asking. And so listening to your employees, but asking them what they want and involving them in the conversation is something that we've hit on at the Industrial Commons that's worked really well for us.
Thank you. So myFutureNC, we are a nonprofit, and we're focused on the state's attainment goal. And that goal is to have 2 million North Carolinians ages 25 to 44 with a high-quality credential or an industry-valued credential or a post-secondary degree by the year 2030. Our shared vision is to make sure that we've got skilled employees to be able to fill the jobs that we're so fortunate to create, but that also that we've got opportunities that we're providing for North Carolinians to be able to have upward mobility. And I shared a comment last Monday, and I think it resonates with me, that we want to make sure that all these jobs that we're attracting to North Carolina and that we're so fortunate to create, that we've got skilled North Carolinians to fill North Carolina jobs, right? Thank you. And we don't want to leave behind the people who have been in this state forever. We love all the in-migration and people that are finding our natural assets and the wonderful things that our state offers. We want everybody here, but we also want to make sure that we don't leave behind those individuals who have been in our state forever. We're currently, when we think about 2 million by 2030, we need 444,000 more people with skills that have credentials or a degree by the year 2030 in order to meet our goal. People often ask, well, now what happens after 2030? Well, we still are going to have more jobs, and so there'll be a 2040 goal and a 2050 goal, et cetera, et cetera. But for now, we're focused on 2 million by 2030. Where are we today? We're 31,000 behind where we need to be in order to be on track to reach the goal. So 31,000 behind where we need to be, and we need 444,000 more. And when you couple that with declining college enrollments, we've got a lot of work. It's going to take all hands on deck. My board member here, right at the front, Dr. Hope Williams, with our independent private colleges and universities, our public universities, our community colleges, we have the most robust educational infrastructure in the entire nation. But we've got to make sure that every single one of us and everything we do, we're rowing in the same direction, so that we can bring these people back into the classrooms and get them moving forward. So to keep the students on track, we've got 2 policies that we're personally, that our organization is going to be championing this session. The board of directors has endorsed that we would get behind the Department of Public Instruction and the State Board of Education around encouraging and having career planning in place for every middle and high school student. We know that it starts early, so making sure students are tracking forward. And then the second gets to a conversation that many people have brought up today, and that's affordability. So we will also be championing a policy that would remove the barrier of affordability for the actual industry-valued credential and the training program. So we'll be championing trying to get funding for these industry-valued credentials in the long session. The next panel is going to take a deeper dive. It's going to go into healthcare, tourism, manufacturing. So they're going to continue the conversation about the broader ecosystem and the partnerships that are necessary to support it. But I want to turn our attention back over and pick Gerald's and Sara's minds about how we prepare workplaces for the future by transforming work environments so that all workers and employers have the best chance of success and can also participate to their fullest potential. So when we think about success of business, historically, business has focused on the profit margin, right? And so we know that our economy is changing. In order to attract top talent, the values of employees has shifted. So employers are having to think about this differently. So when we think about, quickly learning, it's equally important to focus on preparing our workplaces for the future based on what these employees value. And so our younger generation, even many of our just current employers, regardless of age, they're looking beyond the workplace on what they value most. They're focusing on societal responsibilities as well. This survey stood out to me. According to the survey, 71% of professionals say they would be willing to take a pay cut to work for a company that has a mission that they believe in and has shared values. So in response, business leaders are having to work under more pressure than ever to do well while also doing good. They have to position themselves with satisfied employees that ultimately also positively impact their bottom line. So the concept of stakeholder capitalism has surfaced. This can be a more complex way of leading an organization than shareholder capitalism. but with the application of new approaches, it has the potential to offer something of higher value. So, Gerald, I'm going to turn to you. You've been doing a lot of research, and I want to hear from you. What in the world is stakeholder capitalism? Tell us what it is first, and how can employers help to create better employee satisfaction and hopefully company loyalty in a time of what seems like a transient workplace? And how can businesses manage multiple stakeholders to create a win-win?
So Cecilia, we actually at the Kenan Institute just completed a one-year grand challenge studying stakeholder capitalism. We're actually moving now to our grand challenge this year is workforce disrupted. So both topics very much related to the discussion we're having. What stakeholder capitalism is that businesses are being asked to do more than just maximizing the profits for shareholders. Businesses are thinking about what's happening in their community, what's happening to their employees, what's happening to the environment, and the impact that they're having on those various stakeholders. And the stakeholders can be extremely broad: your suppliers, the community beyond just your employees. And so we dug into this question of how can businesses manage stakeholder capitalism, go from a model of which they care about shareholders and in which they have to care about the broader community. And what we found is that, and interestingly, that the discussion change agents is that we focused on change agents. And those change agents can be investors who say, look, I care more about the environment, or I care more about how you're treating employees than just my profits. And we built a model that discusses that. Another change agent is our employees. And as you said, Cecilia, employees care these days about more than just how high their wages are. But they want the companies to do good. And they're willing to force that through working at places where they're going to choosing to work at places where they're going to do good. Another change agent is the government. And so government mandates in terms of the environment. And so what we found is that there are a lot of win-win solutions where companies, through research, we've found that companies undervalue the benefits of giving employee benefits such as worker training or health benefits, or even having a gym in their facility, and that increases retention, that increases productivity, and that increases employee happiness. It seems obvious, but it actually took economists digging into the data to find these results and then saying, look, this is going to give you higher returns. It's a win-win. The challenge is when you don't have win-win situations. And as economists, we acknowledge that there are challenges where the environment could potentially come into conflict with employees. So if Duke Energy is building a new plant and it has to think about whether it's going to build a natural gas plant here or it's going to build a wind farm in Texas, there are two competing interests. And one of the things that I'm excited about having Sara on the panel about is that she and what she does is think about these potential conflicting interests between employees or between different stakeholders.
Thanks, Gerald. So Sara is the co-executive director of the Industrial Commons in Burke County. And I have to tell you, in preparing for the panel, I'm really excited about what I learned, and I cannot wait to visit there. We actually have one of our local educational attainment collaboratives that's housed in the Industrial Commons. You support the needs of workers, but doing that's one thing. Creating better jobs is another, and you're doing both. You've created this win-win approach that Gerald just mentioned, and you've turned talk into action. You even house, as I mentioned, the Educational Attainment Collaborative work in Burke. You're being recognized for this ecosystem development and your win-win approach, and most importantly for the audience, your approach can be scaled, which I'm really excited about. So can you tell us first a little bit about the Industrial Commons and then what you're doing that's creating quite this buzz in Burke County?
Sure, absolutely. We haven't done as in-depth of a study as Gerald, but I think our proof is more just in the fact that we have lists of people that want to come work for our enterprises, and we don't have a lot of turnover. So I think we have hit on something unique that we've been able to attract and retain, especially young people in Burke County, which is a pretty rural community. So we are a hybrid nonprofit. That means that we're a 501c3, but we are also starting a lot of for-profit businesses. So we have 5 businesses we've started in the community. There was a speaker right as we were coming on that was asking about that model of economic development. How do you focus on, at a county level, both attracting big companies to come into your community, but also just creating locally owned businesses that really root wealth in community? So those 5 businesses that we've started over the past 5 years, we've driven about $32 million into our local economy, which we're really proud of. And then we also, on the nonprofit side, have a whole suite of workforce development, community engagement, and youth development programs that we carry out. So really our goal at the end of the day and our mission is to eliminate poverty in Burke County. And so we're doing everything from skilled training to job creation to housing development, industrial development, because we believe that a lot of growth for families and workers in rural places in North Carolina can start with a quality job, but there really has to be an approach that attacks all of those other things that families are struggling with in rural North Carolina.
You mentioned housing, and I know from this morning's conversation, 3 barriers to success that continue to surface aside from affordability: housing, transportation, and childcare. Can you share a little bit more about what you're doing at the Industrial Commons that's addressing the affordable housing issues that you're facing there?
Yeah, so we're early on in that work. We have purchased a parcel, and I think, again, as you said earlier, Cecilia, being a model for other communities, we're looking at structuring it as a limited equity co-op. So it's really what some of the speakers were saying earlier this morning about going at things collectively and together versus alone. And I think a lot of our models clearly that we have around housing are broken. And so it's really about thinking outside the box and creating an entirely new model.
Maybe I'll just follow up. One of the things that we've found is that housing has become just a barrier to a lot of economic activity. I mean, if you think about it, we are benefits in North Carolina, of all this in-migration, but it's also created challenges because, you can't have school, there are places where you can't have school teachers and firefighters have affordable housing, and so how can you kind of build this community that's a growing community and have affordable housing and have people have people live in the community and be part of the community and continue this growth. So I think that this is a big challenge that we're digging into. Perhaps maybe that's going to be our next year's grand challenge. I already have some colleagues I'm pushing on that are doing work on affordable housing because it's a actually national challenge, but in particular in states that are growing like North Carolina, it's a problem.
Thanks, Gerald. Well, I'm going to shift gears just a tad and touch on something that I mentioned Work in Burke, and they are a local educational attainment collaborative of MyFutures. As we think about focusing on this educational attainment goal for the state and getting all the ships rowing in the same direction towards the state's North Star, mentoring and internships is one way to keep kids on track. So, Sara, can you talk to me a little bit when I think about employer engagement and I think about our education system? I talk to employers and they want to be involved. Education wants to have employers engaged in the education system and with our students. And at the same time, they often talk different languages. And so when I think about some very concrete examples of how employers can engage or things that can be done. I think about mentoring, I think about internships, I think about apprenticeships. Share with us a little bit about what Work in Burke is doing with mentoring and internships that you believe can help keep students on track and also keep people in the community engaged.
Yeah, so we started a program last year called Opt-in, Opportunity Internship. And a theme I've heard all day is around partnerships, and we really couldn't have done that without our close relationship with our public schools and our community college. And it's a mentorship internship program, and part of the beauty of it, I think, is that each student is paired not only with a buddy in the workplace, a work buddy, but they're also paired with a community mentor. And we saw a lot of success with that program. 100% of the students that participated either finished with a full-time job or a firm plan to finish post-secondary education. So it was a great program, and a lot of our work at the Industrial Commons, in addition to the jobs that we've created in the community, which are 125 jobs now that we've created, we're supporting about 60 other businesses throughout Western North Carolina and beyond to think about this frame of job quality. And how do you really, to your point earlier, create a workplace where people want to be? And for us, a lot of that conversation is around where young people want to be, because young people want very different things in the workplace today than generations before. So part of our work through Opportunity Internship was to share with the companies that were participating what young people wanted in the workplace. And one of those things is constant feedback loops and mechanisms. So that was one way that we built out through the buddy system, the opportunity for those students to have a constant feedback loop with their employer.
Gerald, anything you want to tag on there?
So I guess I'm going to take it a little bit to the macro level. So one of the things that we've embarked on is something called the American Growth, initiative called the American Growth Project, in which we are studying the microeconomies of the United States. And what I mean by microeconomies are they can be large cities such as New York City, or small cities or regions such as Hickory. And what we're doing is we're looking into the economic growth that is occurring across the nation, and studying how it differs, and it differs substantially across the nation or even across the state. For example, in this year, and over the last 10 years, the Triangle area has been one of the fastest growing regions or microeconomies, or as we call them, extended metro areas in the country. Meanwhile, our neighbor to the west, the Greensboro area, has been one of the slowest. And then its neighbor to the southwest, Charlotte, has been in between. And we are studying why that is occurring. What skills do our employees, what's the difference in skills that are occurring, in jobs that are occurring, and to kind of bring it to what we've heard here, a lot of it is, are you growing in industries that are, advanced manufacturing, technology focused? Do you have those skills? Are you creating those skills like what we're doing here, or what you're doing here at NC State, what we're doing at UNC, and especially and holistically, and this is really important, in the community colleges, because many of those jobs that are creating growth are not coming from NC State or UNC Chapel Hill, but from the what's happening in the community colleges. So we are undertaking that, and I think it's some really exciting research that we're initiating, and we're learning a lot of interesting things.
Thank you. All right, so I'm gonna wrap up, so we have just a couple of minutes for questions. But before I do, Sara, if anybody wants to learn more about the Industrial Commons in order to try to figure out how to scale it, how would they do that?
Yeah, we have a lot of great resources on our website, and we're actually in the process, because we've been asked a lot increasingly over the past year or two, how could we do this in our own community? And we can't tell other folks how to do this in their own community, but I think what we can do is provide the tools and the resources and the frameworks that we've hit on and has helped us be successful in Burke County. And so we are starting to provide the opportunity for other communities and community leaders to come to Morganton and learn our model of ecosystem development, which we're really excited about. And Again, we can't tell them how to do it, but we can provide the resources, and our hope is that what's taken us the past 8 years to build out in Morganton, another rural community in North Carolina, with the right tools and resources could build out in a much shorter time frame and really accelerate their work.
I love seeing all the work in rural North Carolina. I live in the city, and we often don't take our time to go and see all this good stuff. So I enjoyed hearing from you, and also like NC Tech Paths from what's going on in the Wilkes community. Before I shift to the question, I want to just highlight a couple of things. I think that what Randolph said really resonated, and he said, he said something to speak, when you've got something, you have something to speak to when a person finds their purpose. And so that gets back to making sure that employees in the workplace can find their purpose. And when we heard from Med, I have to say of all the panelists today, the gentleman Med, who was the employee, the older gentleman, and he said, that his dental work, he said, if I had the dental work, you'd see me smile more. I don't know about you, but he certainly made me smile just by seeing him on the stage. And so finding ways to continue to engage, whether it's older employees, younger, but finding the perfect way to engage them in the workplace, I think is certainly something that's near and dear to me, and I imagine to you as well for you being here. So we've got just a couple of minutes for questions, but perhaps, Sara? Okay.
Sara, could you explain a little bit about how your work is bringing back textile and furniture jobs? It's so exciting. And disclaimer, I'm from Golden Leaf and work with Sara. But she is talking about bringing young people interested in these jobs. And they have some very traditional titles. And then, Sara, just for my own, just really basic understanding, what is a equity co-op housing?
Great question. Our staff person, Erin Kaiser, is right in front of you. She's writing the rules on what a limited equity co-op in North Carolina looks like. So, part of how we've been able to do our work is wonderful funders like Golden Leaf, Suzanne, and a lot of other wonderful support that we've had in the community. So one of the first things we did when we started our work was to map our assets. And this was really a time in rural North Carolina where, particularly in our region, people were looking at every type of company we could attract other than textiles and furniture, because it really had devastated our region when we lost a lot of that as jobs were offshored. But we saw those things as assets, particularly around the knowledge that people had and the intense concentration of those industries in our region. So rather than kind of throwing them out, we thought, these are assets that we can build on. They need to be done in different ways. Hiring a cutter in the furniture industry is not a great title for a job, as Suzanne mentioned. So how can we keep these industries, but do things in a different way? And for us, that really has been around stakeholder capitalism and how we define as the triple bottom line. So we are starting businesses from the beginning, from the foundation, in a way that they are based on the triple bottom line of people, profit, and planet. So we've been fortunate that we've hit on some things where we're not having to throw any of those three out, but that we can balance all three, and it's by building on a lot of those assets and a lot of that institutional knowledge that we have in our community around these heritage industries.
I had a question. I'm Steve Rao, I serve on the City Council in Morrisville, but I'm in the tech sector. And just a few years ago, John Chambers, who he has a big connection in North Carolina, former CEO and chairman of Cisco. He's from my home state of West Virginia. He spoke in Raleigh at a virtual event that I hosted, and he said that like in the next decade, this was pre-COVID, that automation could displace about 40% of the jobs we know of. But John saw a real opportunity in creating over 15 million new jobs. And many of them, he said, would be in startups around emerging tech, AI, robotics, data. My question is to the panel, and John said that Prime Minister Modi in India has taken it very seriously in terms of getting those jobs Trudeau in Canada, Macron in France. But how do we bring those technologies to converge with some of the manufacturing that we have in the rural areas so that these jobs can be created in those rural areas? Because, and I'll end with this, most of the technology investments in our state are coming into more urban areas. So when companies like Apple and these big companies come in to invest, that technology is not dispersed in the rural areas. So what are your thoughts about taking up Chambers' challenge of creating those jobs in North Carolina?
So I first want to answer by saying I've gotten a lot of questions about ChatGPT and is it going to, displace workers? And it's really interesting because as Julia, the first speaker, talked about, we're talking about employee shortages, and now we're talking about AI taking over the world. So historically, and maybe this time is different, technology has always been a complement to workers. That doesn't mean there are workers that aren't displaced. If you recall history, the Luddites burned the textile mills because they were worried, or textile early manufacturing because they were worried that would take away their jobs, when in fact it created more product, more demand, and ultimately more jobs. I don't think anybody here is saying that they have too much time on their hands from their jobs. And so I'm a staunch believer that, as John Chambers said, you're going to see differences, and one of the things we need is training, because people are going to have to be, and flexibility of the workforce. So we need to train, we need to educate the workforce to be flexible. We need training, employers to have training so that they can move their workforce from, what their current job is to the jobs of the future. But I think we're not going to see displacement, we're going to see growth, but it has to be based on a trained workforce. And the way you do that on a rural basis, and we're seeing this in our data, is by getting those skills out there, and again, being holistic about what those skills are. So it may not be that you're going to have a software developer in a rural area, but you need people, but you will have people who are trained to build the technology and to maintain the technology. And and this is occurring in the textile industry as well. They need workers to do advanced manufactured textiles. It's not cutting. It's whatever the term is. It's more technology than you would imagine.
All right, I think we are at time. We do not want to hook. So thank you for your time today. We appreciate it. Thank you, Gerald. Thank you, Cecilia.
Thank you.